okay, this makes sense. Maybe it's bipolar, maybe it's borderline. And these are all these words that were thrown at me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that tracks. Sure, you're describing me on paper, but we weren't looking at all the other things that were happening. So it was like, oh, it's just ADHD with poor emotional regulation, which is very normal.
Hello, and welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson. I'm the president and founder here at Heart and Solutions Mental Health Counseling. We are still doing individual, family, couples counseling over telehealth anywhere in the state of Iowa, but we are also doing it in any of our 6 office locations in Iowa. And here's Chrissa to tell you about BHIS, Behavioral Health.
I'm Chrissa Hunt, so I am the vice president at Heart and Solutions, so I supervise our BHIS department. BHIS stands for Behavioral Health Intervention Services, and that is our program where we go in-home and work with children ages 4 through 18 on different behavioral skills. We can also see them at school, in our office, or telehealth right now as well. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
Yeah, we post every Sunday night at 5 p.m. Central Time. So we encourage you to do what we do. Batch up your laundry or whatever horrible task you hate doing. Don't do that on a Wednesday night. Do that every Sunday night at 5 p.m. and then never think about clean laundry again for the entire week. That also gives you that entire week to get scheduled with your counselor if you haven't seen them in a little bit or you don't have your session set up for that week. And that also gives you that entire week to get in touch with our guest from this week and the resources that they can provide to you. So we've got our guests today. We've got Megan Buck. Welcome, Megan. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So Megan is a neurodivergent academic coach and an ADHD specialist. So she does this coaching one-on-one, working with children, with students, middle school, high school students, also working with their parents and families to help build that supportive routine, structure, and just communication within the family. She also hosts a women's ADHD support group, which I'm very interested in talking about because ADHD in women presents so differently than we think about ADHD presenting. And so I love that you've got this women's support group. So she hosts that women's support group that you can join and also does one-on-one ADHD coaching. And it's academic coaching, right, Megan? So tell us about how the academic part comes into that coaching space.
Yeah, so just a little bit of backstory. I've been working with students with ADHD for a really long time, and the academic portion, I was a teacher before, so the academic portion really came into the circle of coaching pretty easily. And what I found was that working with these students after school on their academics with ADHD, I was just really bonding with them. And through the process was certified for ADHD coaching specifically, and then was diagnosed myself. So it was a little bit of a self-exploration, a little bit of a journey there. But what I found is that the academics and the ADHD component just sort of feed into each other a little bit, because we're looking at learning differences and how that might come about, I guess just differently for every kid. So working on supporting them after school has just been beautiful. And then working with the families and then seeing that the adults also have the ADHD and they're like, well, my kid, this is normal. This is normal behavior. And I'm like, actually, you just have ADHD too. So let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah. I think I answered your question fully.
Yeah. So you mentioned then that you were diagnosed yourself with ADHD also. Were you expecting that? What led you to become diagnosed with ADHD on your own?
Yeah, so I've been seeing mental health professionals for about 15 years, and I was diagnosed with a plethora of things, but I just realized I worked really well with kids with ADHD. and was like, let me get certified, let me get trained, let me make sure I've done all the research on this. And then through that, I was like, this sounds like a familiar experience. Let me talk to my doctors a little bit more and see if these previous diagnoses are correct. And we did like some testing, we talked more about it, and they're like, oh, you just have ADHD and it's been presenting as these other things for so long. I was like, oh, you know what? That makes a lot more sense now that I've reflected a lot on my journey through school, because I think that's when it really presents itself. When you have that structure put in place, you can either follow the structure or you struggle with it. And I found that that's the case with pretty much all of my neurodivergent clients. Neurodivergent being like ADHD on the autism spectrum, anything that just kind of strays from the neurotypical, I guess. Was it a surprise to me? Not at all. Was it a surprise to my counselor? Not at all. I think everybody saw it pretty plainly once I had the words for it.
What ways was that presenting for you? You said it was coming out in these different ways. How was that coming out for you symptomatically?
Yeah, so I have the inattentive type, which is very common in those who have been conditioned female from a young age. It's very internally hyperactive. So I daydream a lot, or I will start a task and then switch to something different almost immediately. Like I was doing something the other day, I was cooking, and I was like, oh, wait, I forgot to take the laundry out of the dryer. I forgot to water the plants. And I left the dryer door open. I left half the plants watered. I forgot I was cooking. And then I was like, oh, I burnt it. So it's just like the inability to follow through on a task. It's a really challenging day for me if I don't take my medication, because I will forget that I'm doing things. I will struggle to form a coherent thought, just organizing everything inside my brain because there's so much to filter through. What else have I noticed? Plans are really hard. I will double book myself. I have calendars posted in every room of my house, just as like, here's your reminder. And after I've written it 3 times on different calendars, I'm like, okay, I think I got it now. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind. I used to have a lot of really strong emotional reactions to things, and I think that's where a lot of my misdiagnoses came from. But I've been working with a counselor for about 10 years. I've had the same one, and we've gone through this entire journey together of learning how to emotionally regulate on a different level, because it was like, I think I had one professional say to me, it's like, oh, you're just a crazy woman. And I'm like, oh, okay. What? And at the time I was really young. So I was like, okay, this makes sense. Maybe it's bipolar, maybe it's borderline. And these are all these words that were thrown at me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, that tracks. Sure, you're describing me on paper, but we weren't looking at all the other things that were happening. So it was like, oh, it's just ADHD with poor emotional regulation, which is very normal. It's just, yeah, it was a journey for sure.
Oh my gosh. Can't believe somebody called you a crazy person. Yeah. Okay, so you kind of mentioned then the differences between like men and women and how they present ADHD. Can you go more into that and like what you work on with the women's ADHD support group that you run?
Yeah, so I tend to be a little wary of kind of falling into the binary with men and women presenting differently, but that is sort of the verbiage around ADHD research. What you have is the hyperactive ADHD, and you have the inattentive, and then you also have the combined type. The hyperactive tends to be more prominent in those conditioned male from a young age, because of the cultural understanding that boys will be boys and they will be over hyper and they will jump around and normally be involved in athletics. So when we're looking at hyperactivity, we're looking at things that generally manifest more physically or may come out verbally, like outbursts, the interrupting in a conversation, the inability to stay seated for an entire class period, general disruptive type behaviors. And these, again, manifest largely in the classroom. So this is where we kind of see it. And these are things I hear from parents all the time in work. They're like, my kid just is getting in trouble all the time because they're shouting out in class. They can't stay seated. They're what we call a behavior problem, right? So that's more the hyperactive. The inattentive, as I described some of my experience earlier, is very like kind of off in your own little world. These tend to be the more creative kids that show up and are doodling throughout class. In my experience, and from what I saw as a teacher, they're also the kids who wear just the most outrageous outfits that I've ever seen. Lots of colors, lots of mix match patterns. That's just, I don't know if that's technically a symptom or not, but it's something that I saw a lot. And then the combined type is the one I think that goes most undiagnosed. And that's where the hyperactivity and the inattentiveness come together of just, I'm able to kind of pick and choose when I want to be hyperactive, or that's at least what it looks like. So it may present as a behavior in one classroom and not in the others. So people think it's just a behavior problem in one class because for the rest of the day, we're just feeling inattentive. And yeah, I think I explained everything fully there.
Yeah, that combined type can be sometimes the most frustrating for the person experiencing that combined symptomology because it's combined, because it's not, okay, well, this child is regularly, like on a day-to-day basis, has difficulty in sitting in their chairs, climbing up the wall, things like that. Because it's not all the time, then it's, I think, easier for other people looking in to say, oh, well, you're choosing that. You're choosing to do that in my class. And then to personalize it and have big emotions, teachers and parents, and like we'll have big emotions about what our children do. And so then to have those emotions about it because it feels personal when it's combined type versus when it is hyperactive type and we go, okay, I've seen this child on the playground. I have seen this child in the lunchroom. It's not me. They're not doing this to me. This is how this child functions, versus that combined type can be so frustrating for that child or adult that's experiencing it because it's not something that they're choosing to do, but it looks like it is from the outside, and people treat us like it is because that's how it appears. And without that understanding, especially for a student or a middle schooler or a high schooler that maybe doesn't have that understanding because maybe their parents have the same symptomology, but they don't know what it is either. And so they're like, well, that's just how our family is, right? Or that's just how we do things. And it becomes part of family culture as opposed to something that we as a family can now go, oh, okay, we have my husband and my daughter, they have ADHD, both of them. It's amazing how similar they are. And I'm always so grateful that my husband was diagnosed as, I wish he had been diagnosed as a child, but it would have just made things easier for him. But he was diagnosed as an adult. And now when we see those things in our child, we're not personalizing those things. We're going, oh, this is what works for daddy. These are the things that mommy does that helps her stay focused and do things. What works for you, and being able to have that road mapped out, not in what we're doing, but how we're figuring out what to do to solve that challenge is so helpful. So I love that you guys are working with parents, because when we're a child and we're doing this and we feel like, well, I'm alone, right? Or I feel like I'm getting in trouble for things that my parents do. Like, why does the school have a problem with me, right? Like my parents do the same thing. I love that we're working with parents because you can set that example with the parents of like, yeah, these are challenges you can find solutions for. You can create your world to support who you are versus trying to fit yourself into the world. And that just allows for children to be able to be like, oh, okay, I can do that. I can do that too. I can create those systems around myself that I personally need. So I just love that you're doing the work with parents. So tell us more about that work with parents. And that seems like a more recent addition to your programming. So where did that come about?
Yeah. And I love everything you just said. Like everything you said, I wish all of the parents I worked with had that same knowledge base. So it started out, we just found through our experience of working with kids that the more involved the parents were in the work, the more success the kids had. And we focus a lot on executive functioning, which is a really big issue for kids with ADHD, but also you can just struggle with executive function without a diagnosis too. And we just found that the more that we worked with parents and kind of provided support for them and provided these like support networks and trainings, workshops, and the one-on-one coaching even for parents, it was sort of educational. It gave them a space to really separate the person from the problem, because what they were doing was saying like, I'm doing something wrong. They're acting this way because of something I'm doing. And it's not something you're doing. It's just your kid is different. It's not bad. It's just different. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we have these expectations of this is what my child should be doing. And we found that if we're focusing so much on the shoulds, we're missing out on what is. So it's like, how can we work with these parents to say, this is where your kid is. There's nothing good or bad about it. We have these systems that are saying children should be doing certain things. But like, what is that even based off of? It's like a really antiquated system that we're looking at. So how can we just bring in peace and thoughtfulness and really work with our kids to say, here's how your brain works based on what we've discovered. It's different. So here are the things that we need to put in place. And here's the understanding and types of systems that we're going to use at home to support these things. And it's been amazing just hearing these parents' stories and watching the transformation that takes place just within their family dynamic and with the kids is so validating. It's like, it's so amazing just to watch the empowerment of these families really flourish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are some of the strategies that you like suggest implementing either at home or at school with the children?
Yeah, so we pull a lot from different types of educational resources that we've looked at. We focus on certain conversation starters or questions just to help kids understand how their brain works differently. And we do focus a lot on the academics. So there's like 4 or 5 questions that I try to have parents ask their kids so that they can figure out how their brain works. And we use these a lot in our coaching sessions too, of what classes do you notice that you thrive in and what's going on in there? Because sometimes the kids don't understand that certain teachers are implementing things that other teachers aren't. Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, you do really well in your English class. Is it because it's the content, or is there something different that this teacher's doing that your math teacher isn't? Math tends to be the big focal point for a lot of our sessions, which I get. And then we'll ask things like, what types of assignments do you feel most engaged in? Because normally it's a group project. And it's like, okay, well, how can we implement that social component in other classes? How can we get that stimuli that you need in order to stay focused? So we're really focusing on the small details and bringing awareness to the things that the kids might not recognize as happening. So that's something we do just to kind of help them figure out how their brain works. When it comes to navigating difficult conversations, I always try to say we're looking at compromise. We're not looking to be right or wrong, because there's something hardwired in the ADHD brain. I've experienced this and I've seen this with a lot of my clients, is that there's such a strong sense of justice and such a strong sense of needing to be heard. So what we look at is like, you're going to have big blowout conversations with an ADHD. It's just kind of part of it. And especially around middle school, when we slap the hormones in there, oh my gosh, it can be brutal. So we really try to say, like, set up a time where you both agree that that is a good time. Right after school is probably not it, because they're overstimulated from the day. So we want to set up a time that's mutually agreed on, that's neutral. And then we want to have conversations where we're looking for a compromise of the desired behavior or outcome. It's like, hey, I'm noticing, oh yeah. And we're saying I statements rather than, hey, you're not doing it. So it's like, I'm noticing that you're struggling getting your assignments turned in on time. What do you think we can do to make this happen? And then you're coming to an agreement rather than saying, I'm taking away the video games until you get your assignments turned in. Because an ADHD brain is going to say, that's not fair immediately, because they get the dopamine hit from the fight. So it's like, we want to take away any need for a dopamine hit in the conversation. But those are like the two biggest strategies that we've really implemented. It's like looking at how the brain works and looking at how to navigate conversations just to really move towards a more peaceful home life, especially since school tends to be the big topic with these families.
Mm-hmm. I love that you're doing a solution-based approach for all of these things, and you're creating an individualized plan for every single student and family that you're working with. And I think sometimes that gets, there's an expectation that the school should be doing that for every student. And what I love about the service that you're providing is that, okay, if my child is going to a large public school and they cannot sit with my child and do these things. Yes, she may have an IEP at school or an EAP at school, but I, as a parent, can really advocate and provide this resource to my child so that she has that individualized plan and can really do it specific to her. There are answers that a child or a student might give to you, their coach, versus their teacher or their principal or their school counselor. And I think that is similar to counseling, just being able to have that third party, that other person who's not involved in the school district, who's only there to help you, I think is so important. I love that you bring up the dopamine cycle as well, because, oh man, I feel like as humans, we get so caught up in this dopamine cycle. But as for those with ADHD, that can be so, it can just pull us. It just pulls us so strongly. And it's so fast. It cycles so quickly. And so I love that you're utilizing that for your client's benefit. You're like, hey, this is what it is. You're getting a dopamine hit from this, so let's use that. One strategy that we're using at home that we just started doing, I'm loving it so far. We've been doing it for maybe 2 months. Is it brings in some of these things. It's called the WISE appeal, and my daughter calls it the smart banana because that's how she remembered it, the WISE appeal, because a banana has appeal. So she'll always say, can we do smart banana? And I'm like, yeah, we can. So whenever I ask her to do something, it is that argument, right? It's that instant, no, but I'm still reading the rest of this. No, but I only have 4 minutes left of this video. No, but I am cold. I can't get out of bed, right? And the whining is the initial reaction. And then when I hear the whining as a parent, I'm conditioning myself to go, let's do a WISE appeal. I'll help you do it. And so the WISE appeal format is, I'll say to her, okay, repeat after me. Mommy, I know that you want me to. And then she'll fill in the blank. Mommy, we did it this morning. Mommy, I know you want me to get out of bed and put on my clothes. Okay, good. She fills in the blank. Because. Now the because is so important, because the because helps her to think about, why do I want her to get out of bed and get her clothes on, right? And so this morning she said, because we don't want to run out of time before we get to school, so I can have breakfast before school. Otherwise my tummy will hurt at school. I'm like, exactly. That's why I want you to get out of bed. If we didn't have to do breakfast, you could sleep for another 10 minutes, but please get out of bed now. So because of that structure really helps her, and she's 6, so she's a younger child, but it really helps her to understand where I'm coming from. But it also tells me, okay, she understands my side, so I can relax a little bit too in the conversation. And then she'll say, and then the next part of it is, I'm having a problem with it because. And then she fills in the blank. So I'll say, I'm having a problem with it because, and she'll say, I'm having a problem with it because my feet are really cold, my shoulders are cold, the blanket is warm, right? I don't want to get out of bed. And I'm like, absolutely, that's valid. It stinks getting out of bed when it's cold. That's valid. So it allows me as the parent to also understand, okay, where's she coming from? She's not refusing to get out of bed because she hates me and I'm a terrible mom and she doesn't want to get out of bed. It's not that she doesn't want to go to school. It's that she's cold. And so then the third part of that is, can we please? And then it's up to her. So I say, can we please? And she repeats back, can we please? And then she has to fill in that blank. And so she has to suggest something that suits both of those needs and intentions for the morning. And so it'll be, can you please put my sweatshirt on me under the covers and put my socks on my feet while I'm under the covers? And that way I can be warm and go downstairs and eat breakfast. Yes, I can do that. Right. So it really puts that in her court, though. I'm not going to sit there and say, what if I put your sweatshirt on? What if I bundle you up in a blanket and carry you down? Right. Because every single one of those is going to be no, because she likes the no, like she likes the continuing. But she also gets a huge boost when she asks for a solution that meets her needs, and I say yes. She gets a huge dopamine boost from that, and she loves it. She gets a little power trip over that, and I'm great with it because she goes and eats a breakfast, right? So I love what you're doing with that, the compromise of that. And this formula that we've been using lately has been so nice because it's not draining on me as the parent either. I don't have to think of the solution. Otherwise I'm going to throw solutions at her. She's going to shoot them all down. Mm-hmm. So this has been one. So it's called the Wise Appeal, and has been just really, really awesome lately. I also love what you said about you were misdiagnosed. And because of the frustration, it is one thing I want people to always hear about ADHD. It's frustrating having ADHD. Like, I am not frustrating you. It is frustrating to me to have ADHD. And I think that sometimes that's not always understood by our support people, or our supervisors or our teachers, the people that need us to do stuff. And do it in a timely manner and in a focused manner and all of the stuff that they teach at school and want us to do. It's not always said that, like, it's frustrating. And so that frustration comes out in so many different ways. It comes out with whining, it comes out with yelling, it comes out with arguing. And then those symptoms themselves get diagnosed into other things. So I think it's beautiful, the example that you're sharing of your life, because it happens to so many people and they don't even know that it's happening at the time. So are these online groups or are these in-person groups? And can people use the service over video or over the phone?
Yeah, everything we do is virtual. We're based out of Atlanta, and every once in a while we'll do some in-person things if like spaces allow for it, but our entire team meets virtually. So any support groups, any trainings, any workshops, any coaching sessions we do are all via Zoom. Awesome. And kids, like all of our clients, kids, adults have been like, this is so convenient because I can just meet with you wherever I am and they get the support that they need. Maybe it's like after school before practice or during a lunch break or before school even starts, which isn't my favorite time to meet, but we do it. Yeah, it's all virtual.
Awesome. That's really convenient. So you can do it like in the school day then? Does the school reach out to you to get that set up, or how does that work?
I would say the ones that we meet during the school day, it depends on the district that the child is in, because sometimes they'll have like a study hall work block. And if the school says it's okay for you to meet with someone during this time period, then we're able to. We also have a lot of homeschool clients, so we can meet with them during the day. And the parent clients that we have are meeting during their lunch break as well.
Awesome.
So we talked about some of the signs that parents can look for if they think, oh, maybe this would be helpful for my child. We've talked about some of the behavioral signs. How about academically? What kinds of things academically can people, teachers or caregivers, be looking for?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked. I consider it a swear word when I see not reaching their full potential. I consider potential a swear word because I think we're putting expectations that don't need to be there on tiny humans. Mm-hmm. So if you get, like, let's say your child is doing relatively well, but the feedback is constantly like, they could be doing better, or they're doing the bare minimum on assignments. Well, yeah, because I'm not getting a dopamine hit from the multiple choice assignment that you have assigned. So anything having to do with like effort, especially, or anything having to do with disruptive behavior, maybe they're like, if a report card says they're very chatty in class and would benefit from paying more attention, you know? I would say average grades are generally typical with ADHD, like roughly somewhere around a C. Anything lower than that, I would say that maybe the ADHD has gotten out of hand just because the inattentiveness or the hyperactivity, the distractibility can be really challenging. I would say maybe they excel in hands-on type classes, but struggle in things that they're not interested in. I've had some kids come to me who excel in history because they're really interested in it, but then they struggle with language arts because they're like, I don't want to write an essay. So if you're seeing like not consistent grades across the board, that can be an indicator as well. But the most common thing I see is feedback saying they could do better. Like, well, yeah, they could, but they're not going to because they're not interested in this.
So is it parents who usually reach out to you to start services? Is it schools, like teachers that usually are reaching out, or how do people usually get involved with your program?
It's generally parents because parents will see the desire for a change first.
Mm-hmm.
We've started working with a couple of schools recently, just kind of being in their network. We're happy to work with schools, absolutely, just because we know that there are kids out there that need this type of support. But it's largely parents reaching out who are ready for a change. And then we make sure that the kid is on board as well before we start any services, because if the child isn't interested, there's not much we can do, which is why we're trying to work more with parents, because if the kid isn't quite ready, generally the parent is, and we can work with the parent to try to start making these changes on their own rather than depending on us to make the change for them, because we just want to make sure that these families and these kids are getting what they need.
Absolutely. You talked about how sometimes these students will have that, when we think about where that phrase, they're not living up to their potential comes from, we kind of pick it apart. It does make sense in that people with ADHD tend to be extremely skilled at certain things. I mean, just extremely skilled. And so when we see that as a teacher or a caregiver and we go, oh, but they're so good at it. They're so good. When I see them build a Lego tower, my mind is blown. Like they're so good. So I know they're smart and I know they're talented. But then when I ask them to do math problems, they're like missing half of them, right? Or because they, like you said, they're not interested. It's not interesting to do that. And so I think that it makes sense that that's kind of where that comes from, because they're excelling. And you use the word excel, and I love that, because we're excelling at certain things. And so how do you guys, I know you use a strength-based approach because you talked about those questions that you asked in the beginning. How do you guys help children, students, families to utilize that acceleration that they're able to do, that kind of superpower that they've got because they have this set of symptoms?
Yeah, so I love that you asked that. Thank you very much. So we start with every client that we get, child, adult, whoever, with an executive function survey, because while interest-based is very important with ADHD, we also look at the executive function skills that may or may not be there. Like, what are the strengths and where can we sort of lean into the strengths that you have to make up for the things that might be a challenge. So something that we noticed, like you gave the example of math homework, like let's say we're doing so well with our history homework, we're excelling in that subject, but math homework is like the bane of my existence. Not only am I not interested in it, but I'm also struggling with task initiation. I don't know where to start. I don't know how to go through this. And maybe I'm also struggling with flexible thinking. The math makes sense in class, but when I have to do it on my own, I can't figure it out because I don't remember the steps. So we're looking at a lot of different things there. So what we're trying to do is, if we're excelling in history, what we want to do is break down the things that are going well in history. Well, what are the steps that we're noticing in these events? Where did it start? Where did these things take place? And then we try to make the connections there for the things that we're lacking. So we look at, how did you start this assignment in history that you did so well with? Because that identifies the task initiation. What worked there? How can we translate that into what isn't working in math? Well, we knew what our first step for history. What do you think your first step is for math? We knew the sequence of events and we knew the steps for history. What do you think the steps are for this assignment here? How can we break it down? And sometimes we have to do a lot of examples. We have to do a lot of very small goal setting to say, I'm going to find the first step for 2 assignments this week. And then from there, we start building the confidence. We start moving forward to say, okay, I can do this on my own. And sometimes it takes a little bit longer depending on where those, I don't like to call them deficiencies. I like to call them areas for improvement, depending on where those are. But yeah, it's a whole process just to kind of say, how do we lean into the things that you are interested in and tie those into the things that aren't as interesting? I'm working with a kid right now on a passion project about urban gardening in Spain, because we're looking at, like, Spanish is boring to him. And as a former Spanish teacher, it breaks my heart. But he's really interested in gardening. So I'm like, okay, let's do some research on urban gardening in Spain or in Spanish speaking countries, because some places do it out of necessity and some places do it for fun. So let's tap into the things you're interested in with these subjects. Math and history, it's kind of hard to tie those together, but 9 times out of 10, if you do like what you were saying earlier, can we tie these together? How? Give them the creative freedom to figure it out, because an ADHD brain, if it loves one thing, it loves connections. How can we tie these things together? Can you think of it in a movie, in a song, in a video game? What is it? So, yeah.
So when kids come to you guys, do they already have an ADHD diagnosis? Do you guys have someone that does the diagnosing? How would, like, if a family's interested in these services, do they need to have that beforehand?
Oh, not at all. I would say only about half of our clients have ADHD or have a diagnosis. I have been working with 2 kids for 2 and 3 years respectively. And I reached out to the parents. I was like, hey, I know you don't have a diagnosis for this kid, but I have been treating him as though he does. I would recommend looking out for a diagnosis, like trying to pursue one. And they'll say, well, he does well, but we're struggling with these things. And I'm like, yeah, that's textbook ADHD. So I would go ahead and pursue a diagnosis. And if they're still in the school system, then normally the school will take care of it. It does have pretty long wait lists and a pretty long return time. We do not diagnose, but I always recommend, like, it's better to get tested than not if you're concerned, in my opinion, just because you can get the accommodations you need. And that goes for adults and kids. Like, I think the acronym is JAN. If you're an adult with ADHD, you can get accommodations at work. The Job Accommodation Network, I think, is what it's called. But yeah, your brain works differently, so it's good to get what you need.
Absolutely. And even being able to go through this coaching process, if a student comes to you because of academic challenges and they come to you and then they find, oh, these strategies work for me. I have found strategies that work for me. They are one step ahead when they come to a therapist to do a diagnosis and do a diagnostic assessment. They can say, this is what I was experiencing at school. These are things that were helpful to me when I do them. And that gives that person who's doing that diagnosis so much more information than when a student and a parent come into the assessment and they say, well, he just doesn't care about school, right? And we go, I mean, so many different things, right? And so, but if we can say, he has a hard time at school when these things happen. He has a great time at school when these things happen. Okay, that is so helpful when we look at diagnosis. So being able to come through a coaching, an academic coaching situation with that knowledge, and then coming in for the diagnosis, you're going to be much better equipped to give that information that's needed. So that's a great idea. And very, very helpful for people to know that, yeah, they can contact you and get signed up for that coaching whether or not they have that diagnosis.
Mhm.
So that's a great question. Yeah. And it makes sense what you're saying about that difficulty starting tasks, because you talked about overwhelm, and overwhelm is so difficult. It feels like you're walking through mud when there's a wall of things that you could, should, want to be doing at any given second. There are 1,000 things that instantly can come to your brain and that you instantly could, should, want to be doing. And so being able to filter those out, and I think you used the word filter before, just being able to filter those out and be able to focus on, okay, what is the first question on this math worksheet? Because sometimes a history question, for example, it might be, or a history assignment, it might be 4 different questions, but they're like short answer or essay form, right? So you're doing the same amount of work. You're doing 2 pages, but it's 4 separate things. And so you can really go, okay, this first one, great. And I can really get into that one versus a math worksheet that has 60 problems on it. And you're like, oh my gosh, my brain is telling me to do all of these 60 problems at one time, as well as like I left my soccer ball outside and I need to remember to pick up my brother after school, right? And all of that, all of those things that are coming in. So I love that you're able to help those students to say, okay, how do you start that history one? Can we think about that the same way? In history, you're looking at that first problem, right? And you're like, this is the one I'm doing. And even writing lines, like with my daughter, we can write lines on the page and separate it out into quarters and be like, we are only doing this quarter, right? Maybe that quarter has 2 math problems on it because she's in first grade, but we are only doing this quarter. We're not even looking at these other ones, or using papers to just cover up every single other problem on there. And then she looks at it and she's like, 2 plus 2, really? I learned that in kindergarten. I'm like, okay. It's awesome to hear that real life example of being able to move that love of history and that, excelling in history over into those math problems is so important. So it sounds like you had a great counseling experience, as well as you refer people to counseling. Can you tell us about that counseling experience?
Sure. Yeah. So I was like, where do I start? I was misdiagnosed at 21 with a plethora of things, and then misdiagnosed again at 23, but I had the same counselor throughout the entire experience. And I've been working with her since. So I've been working with her for about 10 years now. And it's just been wonderful to kind of go from the approach that we were using. I was in DBT therapy with this counselor, just to really, because the emotional regulation was the component that I was really struggling with. And it helped me kind of figure out and filter my thoughts without medication, because I was still undiagnosed with ADHD and I didn't have the resources that I needed for that. It really helped me figure out how to organize my thoughts, how to process the emotional reactions I was having, and really how to work on emotional regulation and self-regulation, which were the 2 executive functions I still struggle with today. I just found it to be a very empowering and validating experience for me because I had the right counselor. I had seen like 3 other counselors before that just weren't a good match personality wise. But this one specifically, I don't know, I felt like we were just kind of growing together through my experience. And I was able to really step into the things that I needed the most. So we did DBT therapy for about I think it lasted like a year. And then from there, it was just sort of maintaining. It's like, what are the struggles that you're having right now? How can we work together? What's the problem? How do we solve it? Remember, you're good at these things. And then we took a break for about a year, and then I came back. I was like, hey, I'm noticing these struggles again. What do I do? And she was like, you think you have ADHD, right? And I was like, I do. And she was like, I think you should probably pursue that a little bit more. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So it's just been a really fulfilling, validating experience of saying, thank you for believing these experiences that I have, and thank you for validating these new diagnoses as they kind of come in. and just really supporting me on this growth journey of self-discovery and all kinds of stuff. I would not have survived a pandemic without her, that's for sure. It was a really big struggle there. But yeah, I think I answered your question fully there.
Yeah. For people who have no idea what DBT is, can you give us a little background on what that is?
Oh, sure. Dialectical behavioral therapy, the way I understand it, so please correct me if I'm wrong, is going through and just sort of understanding wise mind of like, here's your emotional brain and here is your logical brain. We're trying to reconnect them in some way so that you can balance out these strong emotional reactions you're having with a logical thought and understanding how to process the emotion fully rather than letting it take over everything that's going on. Because it, for me, in my experience, it was like, if I had one negative interaction, this is very common with ADHD too, with rejection sensitive dysphoria, any sort of negative interaction would become a hurricane of emotion that I had zero control over. So it was kind of saying, okay, here's that emotion, we're going to name it, and here's how we're going to handle it next time it happens, and kind of coming up with a game plan and very small steps to follow of saying, here's what we do when we feel that way. Instead of having a hurricane of emotions and screaming, we're going to go for a run when we feel anxious like that, or we're going to color in one of your adult coloring books and finding healthy coping mechanisms just to really process things.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that description, and I think it's so helpful, that you've experienced that and can now share what that is like for other people. It's that feeling of logically I know this, but I'm like I can see I can feel my body doing this other thing, right? Like logically I know my mom is maybe right that I shouldn't eat 10 cookies, but now I'm on the floor screaming at her and I don't even know why. Right? Like it the question I ask her, my daughter a lot is like, is this helping you in some way? And she's like, no, I just can't not do. And I'm like, okay, that's exactly what it is. It's that storm of emotion and that hurricane of emotion taking over her. It's not her choosing to have a fit on the floor. And so being able to take those pieces for ourselves and know for ourselves, like, yeah, I know logically this thing, but there's a disconnect, and being able to do DBT to bring those together is a beautiful thing. So thank you for sharing that. And I also love how you describe the relationship, because that relationship that you've had with your therapist, it sounds like has changed so much and grown with both of you, and the relationship kind of grows around you and with you, and you grow apart, and then you come back together for sessions, and you're different people a year later, both of you are. And it's beautiful to see that, because that relationship is so important. Even when things are going great, it's so important to have that relationship and know, yeah, but I can come back when I need to, when I want to, when I want more support, or when I've grown through some of the things that we were working on previously. And now, I'm getting it. Like I'm understanding it. I'm living it. What's next? What are we doing next? Where are we going deeper here? So I just love that description of counseling. And also that you had three others. So how did you know that those three others were not a good fit? And what did you do to go ahead and continue on until you found the right one?
So I'm thinking back to the ones that I met with. I don't know how deep we want to go in this episode. I found that one I was talking to was invalidating a lot of my experiences. Like I would say, this is something that happened to me. And they're like, well, that's probably not what actually happened. I was like, oh, okay, we're done here. And then another one, I remember saying, like, one of my goals is to like just understand certain relationship dynamics, because relationship dynamics tends to be a struggle for me, just with the self-regulation, emotional regulation, all that. And she was like, I don't think that that's a realistic goal for you because of the things that are wrong. And I was like, the things that are wrong? What? I was like, I feel like that's not, you shouldn't be saying things are wrong with me in your field. So they were just like things that didn't sit quite right. And it just like with my sense of justice that I feel and like the gut reaction that I was having, in my experience, if it's not an automatic yes in any sort of therapeutic or psychological treatment, and if I don't have a good feeling that this is exactly what I need, it's a no, because those instincts are there for a reason. So if it's not aligning, it's not it.
Awesome. Well, then if you could give a suggestion to somebody on the fence about starting counseling or continuing, like if they have a bad counseling experience, for example, like you had, what suggestion might you give?
That there's more out there. Everyone's got a different flavor profile. As a therapist, as a counselor, as a psychiatrist, you just have to find your favorite flavor. I'm a big fan of metaphors, so
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, not everybody likes every flavor. I hate bubblegum ice cream, hate it. But there are people who love bubblegum ice cream. And so that's exactly right. There are all different flavors, and we can keep trying until we find that one. I love that you listen to your instinct and you listen to your gut reaction. And when you heard something that was not validating, that was not supportive, you were like, oh, I don't have to continue this. I don't have to continue with this person. I can continue that search, that journey. It's not over. It's just over with this counselor that called me a crazy lady, or that said, oh, that didn't happen, or didn't, support my goals. So I just think that's such a beautiful example. So thank you so much for being here, Megan. This was very, very informative, very, very helpful. We love everything that you have shared. If you are looking to get signed up for Empower Academics, Empower Academic Coaching, please visit them on Instagram at Empower Academic, or go to their website at www.empoweracademiccoaching.com. And you can sign up for one-on-one coaching. You can sign up for the Women's ADHD Support Group. They've got workshops on there. They've got all kinds of different things. They've got parent support, family support for your students. So it's not just that academic coaching. It is an entire systemic approach that's happening over there at Empower Academic Coaching. So great resource for everybody to go check out for themselves or for their family members.
I'm Megan Buck, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. Me too. So does Chrissa. We all do. And we thank you for being on the show today. This has been wonderful. We'd love to have you back.
Yeah, I'd love to be back. I enjoyed this profusely. If y'all ever want to just chat, let me know.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you are here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find the You Need a Counselor podcast on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, and comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from this podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. And if you're a provider seeking play therapy CEUs, you can find us at patreon.com/youneedatraining. We'll see you for the next episode, Sunday at 5.